All right, it looks like it's 6 o'clock now, so I want to go ahead and begin. First off, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for our first ever online landscape workshop. Tonight's workshop is focused on how to properly remove grass and select the right types of plants for your new Waterwise landscape and to be rebate ready. My name is Joanna Gonzalez with the Cucamonga Valley Water District, and I'm so happy to have this opportunity to host a virtual landscape workshop for you. Joining me tonight, and the main star of the show, is Scott Kleinrock from Chino Basin Water Conservation District. I want to go ahead and quickly tell you about Scott. Scott is a Conservation Programs Manager for the Chino Basin Water Conservation District and will be leading the workshop. He is a sustainable landscape advocate, educator, designer, and horticulturist, and is passionate about the multiple benefits of regionally adapted landscapes and land planning. Thank you so much, Scott, for all you will be teaching us this evening. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions you would like to ask us regarding rebates, programs, or future workshops, please type your questions in the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. In addition, this presentation will also be recorded and available for you to review on demand by next week. One fun thing I do want to encourage you is if you want to post a photo of yourself, with your children or friends participating in our workshop tonight, we'd love for you to tag us on social media using the hashtag Rebate Ready and tag at CVWD Water. And if you can tag Chino Basin Water Conservation District at CVWCD, that would be awesome. At the end of the workshop, Scott will be inviting you to participate in a poll, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. We want to continue doing landscape workshops for our customers, so we just want to learn and do what we can to make these workshops beneficial to our community. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Scott to begin the workshop. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I am Scott Kleinrock, Conservation Programs Manager at Chino Basin Water Conservation District, and I am very excited to be presenting to you this evening. One other thing that I will mention about myself is that I am a plant nerd. It's part of why I'm talking with you, and specifically for the last 15 years in which I've been involved with various aspects of the landscape industry. A lot of my motivation for starting down this pathway has been that I grew up in the suburbs of the greater Los Angeles area, and I just always have thought that we could do more with how we build our cities and how we live in the spaces around us. And that got me very interested in the typical urban and suburban yard and seeing what more we could do with it. And that's led to a whole series of, I guess you can say, investigations and projects, which has eventually led to my work at the Waterwise Community Center and Chino Basin Water Conservation District. We're going backwards on the slides for a second, but here we go. And so before we get started on the content, I just want to tell you a little bit about who we are at the Waterwise Community Center. Formerly, our name is the Chino Basin Water Conservation District, and we are a small special district of which part of Rancho Cucamonga is our service area. Our service area is the western edge of San Bernardino County over what is the geological Chino groundwater basin. We're formed by a public vote in 1949, and we are a small public agency that does water conservation only. So we work very closely with our local water providers, including Cucamonga Valley. And we say that our mission is threefold: to demonstrate, to educate, and to percolate. And so that's through our demonstration gardens, which are currently closed to the public. We are changing some things around to make them safe to reopen. In the next couple of weeks, they will be open again. 2 acres of demonstration landscapes in Montclair, just off the 10 freeway, showing all sorts of Waterwise plants that you can use at home. We do education, everything from workshops and programs for homeowners and community members to curriculum integrated K through 12 programming during the school year. And we also own and collaboratively operate with other water agencies a lot of acreage over multiple properties that are essentially old gravel pits, which have been re-engineered to do active conservation and percolation of stormwater, as well as imported water to recharge our groundwater table. So if you see some large pits off the 10 freeway that fill up with water sometimes, those are probably us. And we work with all sorts of different audiences, and just want to show a quick picture of one part of our demonstration garden. And before we get into the content, I'll reference a number of often no-cost conservation programs and rebates available to you throughout the presentation. So just wanted to kind of outline those before we get going. If you have questions about the programs themselves, what I would encourage you to do is to use the chat function. On your Zoom screen, you'll have some different buttons you could push. Depending on how you have it set up, you might need to hover your mouse. And in the chat function, you can type messages that will go directly to Joanna throughout this workshop, and she can get back to you with more program information or anything related to Cucamonga Valley's programs. Additionally, just another little bit of housekeeping, we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers. So if you have questions that you're looking to get answered about any of the content that we're covering, there's another function that you can click on, which is Q&A. And so I'd encourage you, as we go, if you have questions, just type them into the Q&A. And every so often, I'm going to keep an eye on the questions as they come in. If there's no questions, I'll keep going. But if questions do start accumulating in between different topics that we cover in the class, I'll stop and I'll read out questions and answers. And then at the end as well, there'll be plenty of time for question and answer as well. So for the programs, we have a number of collaborative programs that are brought to you through Cucamonga Valley Water District and the Waterwise Community Center. One of them that you all would qualify for is a no-cost landscape water efficiency consultation. That is a program where we will actually send a couple of staff members to meet with you at your house, run every zone of your irrigation system, take a full assessment, make notes of anything that's wrong, anything that needs to be fixed, and as well, look at how your automatic irrigation timer is set up for how often and how long it runs each part of your landscape. And we'll take all that information back to the office and we'll come up with a detailed report for you, which could basically function as a checklist of anything that needs to be fixed or adjusted to be more efficient. And as well, what for your current landscape, your timer setting should be to water it so that your plants are optimally healthy, but you're not overwatering at all. So that's a great program for existing landscapes. If you're about to tear out your lawn and put in something new, that's great, but wait till after you're done to call us out for that one. Additionally, wanted to mention that that is currently on hold. We are going over all of our safety protocols, and as soon as we can relaunch that program, we will. But if you know that you're interested, you can get the full details at the link here and send in a request for an appointment, and you'll go onto a wait list. We'll contact you and schedule an appointment just as soon as we get that started again. We also have a landscape design assistance program. This is a no-cost program that will help you design either your front yard or your backyard. Our staff will have a one-on-one meeting with you, go over your property, what you're looking to get out of it, and do either a front yard or backyard. It's no cost, but we do require a $100 refundable deposit, something we need to institute just to make sure that people are serious about doing the project because we spend a lot of staff time on it. After that, you will have, after you get your design, a full year to actually put in a Waterwise garden. If you do that within the year and send us some pictures, you'll get that refundable deposit back. The program is currently on hold, but what it's going to be doing is being relaunched in July as a virtual program. So in the past, we would sit down right next to each other at the Waterwise Community Center, our facility in Montclair, and work on that design. And so we're going to be doing that over a Zoom interface. So it'll be very much like tonight, sharing a computer screen and just talking over the computer audio or over the phone. An intro class for that is required, but this class tonight counts as that introductory class to kind of let you know what you're getting into if you're taking on a landscape project. So if you think that you're going to be interested in this program, we're going to collect your information to make sure that we have you down as having attended this program. So type your name into the chat and mention you're interested into the design program at any point during the presentation. Full details on that program are at cvwcd.org/design. But just one word of warning, you're getting to us right in the middle of some transitions and improvements of the program. So all of the updated information should be live on our website by the end of next week. Most of it will be similar, but there will be some adjustments that are made. So you might want to give it about a week before you read up on the full details. And then finally, lots of free workshops. Oftentimes we do them in person. For the foreseeable future, we are going to be doing online Zoom workshops like this. We offer topic-specific workshops of really getting down to details of teaching you the skills to do different elements of landscape design, landscape installation, or landscape maintenance for home gardens. Usually those are on Saturdays. They're 3-hour workshops. And you can get the full information, descriptions of those at the link right here. And then last thing to mention is if you're interested in any of those workshops but can't make that exact date, we always encourage people to make that date, but we are recording all of those and posting those to our YouTube channel afterwards so you can watch them on demand. And if you go to same initials, cvwcd.org/YouTube, you can get those there. And then a few more programs before we get into it, but we really want to make sure that you know everything that is available to you. Some programs available through the Cucamonga Valley Water District. And so to get started on those and get the full details, contact Joanna, and her email is here. During the program, you can also ask her about it in the chat. And Joanna, if you're starting to get a lot of questions about any particular program, and before we finish the workshop, you want to say anything else about that particular program, just let me know and we'll make some time for that. But there's some really great ones that you should be interested in. One of them is a automatic weather adjusting smart irrigation timer that would replace a traditional irrigation timer where you would tell it, water this long 3 days a week. And then as the weather changes, you need to change its settings and you're wondering how that should be set up as the seasons change. This is a timer that will do a lot of that work for you. Logs onto your Wi-Fi system. So when you do need to make changes, you can do it from inside of your house if the location of it can be reached by your home Wi-Fi system. If not, there's another version of the timer that will still work okay. And that is a no-cost program that will be installed at your house by a professional contractor. There's just a few requirements, a little bit of education before that. But if you don't have that smart timer, you should be interested in that program for sure. And then another new program with somewhat limited availability is a landscape irrigation tune-up program where a contractor will come to your house, assess your irrigation system, and if you need some small repairs, some adjustments to a valve, replace a valve or two, fix a few sprinklers, they will actually perform that work for you, tune everything up, really get you going with your water efficiency. And then finally, there are regional rebate programs. Those are funded by Cucamonga Valley Water District in collaboration with the Metropolitan Water District. No matter where you are, so whether it's you or any of your friends that might not be served by Cucamonga Valley Water District, the interface for all of that is at SoCalWatersmart.com, where you get the full details. And that's where you go for the turf replacement rebate. Something came out wrong in the text. It's not $3,000 a square foot. It is $3 a square foot reimbursement for you putting in your landscape. And so what basically you do is you read all about the program requirements. You will submit some information to them, a rough landscape plan. Our landscape design program can create that landscape plan for you. And as long as that plan and then your installed landscape within 6 months of your approval meets those requirements, you will get $3 a square foot up to 5,000 square feet, with the important caveat that anything over $600, you will be taxed on. It's still a great program. I could pay for a good chunk of a landscape renovation. If you want more details and really a walk through the ins and outs of that program, we do a separate workshop that you can get the information on at the website about the Waterwise Community Center workshops. And that's something called Landscape Transformation Basics that we teach once a month in the evening. So you can join us for that. And then that's also where you'd get other rebates about high efficiency sprinkler nozzles, washing machines, all that sort of stuff. So you go to this website And basically it'll have a pop-up. You tell it you're interested in residential rebates, and then you click on rebates right here, and then you would get the full information about all of your rebates. And so here it is. And then we're going to be jumping into the real content of today's workshop. So if you're interested in a more in-depth discussion of the requirements and some kind of tips on where we see that people sometimes get caught up on that, our next version of that's going to be June 18th or July 16th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. or the YouTube recording afterwards. We're going to go over rebate requirements, and there's something called the sustainable component that sometimes people get confused on. We'll go through all of that. A little bit of the content from that will overlap with this workshop, but there's going to be a lot of new information as well. And so with that, we are going to start the turf removal rebate with looking at a nice green lawn. And to give me some context for where all of you are at, what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch a quick poll. And so what you are going to see are just a couple of questions pop up on your screen. Please, and you'll hit next to answer the next one. But what you want to do is just click on the one that applies to you, click next, and click on the second answer. We'll give just a minute or two for that, and that will actually help me quite a bit to know where our audience tonight is at with their projects. And the votes are coming in, and I will share the results with you so you can see where your fellow workshop attendees are. A little more than half of you have finished up. Thank you very much. About 3/4 of you. We'll just do another 30 seconds or so. If you aren't able to do the voting, that's just fine, but then we'll move on. Okay, let's take a look at the results. So a couple of you have beautiful lush green lawns. Oftentimes we talk to people who are in that situation, and they are just kind of tired of putting in all the work and the resources that it takes. Most of the people who I work with are usually in that second category, mostly green, but there's plenty of brown in the lawn, and they just don't want to put in all the work that it's going to take to get a really lush green lawn. They don't want to spend all of those resources. They'd rather look at alternatives at this point in time, which is great. And then a few other people as we go down from there. One person already has a Waterwise garden, but they're looking for more inspiration, and we should be able to provide that with you, give you some other ideas. And then next question is, do you currently have any Waterwise plantings in your landscape? It's brand new to a lot of you, very typical. This workshop does not assume that you know anything and is a great place to start. A number of you have a few, so hopefully we can provide you with lots of inspiration and confidence to expand from there. And one person already has a lot of Waterwise plants. It's probably the same person from before. So this workshop is really for all of you to help you out with wherever you are starting. And with that, let's get back into the presentation, starting with this green lawn, because there are a few great reasons to have a lawn. It's a great place for kids to play. If your kid is learning how to walk, lawn is a great place to learn how to do that on. They're nice to lay in every once in a while if you don't have grass allergies. They're easy in some ways. You don't need to think much about a lawn because most people just have a gardener who comes through, rips through everything in 20 minutes or so once a week. And oftentimes I talk to people, they just put a check or even some cash in the mailbox when the gardener comes, and that's it. And then for the most part, neighbors aren't going to complain about a neatly kept lawn. However, if you don't actually use the lawn for any of those purposes, if soccer practice is not happening on your front lawn and it's just a strip of green that takes a lot of water, lawns are boring. They don't do much for most of us, especially front lawns. Most of us don't really use them. They are essentially ecological disaster areas. There's no biodiversity. There's nothing in the lawn that gives back to birds, usually pollinators, any of the creatures that we want to support that are beneficial to have around. Lawns don't offer much for us or them. If people are keeping those lush green lawns actually, the fertilizers that go into them when we have large rain events and there's runoff, are a source of a lot of pollution. They use a lot of water. And ultimately, really, if you look into the history, they originated as an attempt to look like a rich European landowner who had so much land that they could just have grass. They didn't need to grow any crops on it. That's really where the lawn comes from and has become the suburban standard. And so I am absolutely not here to say you're a bad person if you have a lawn. And in fact, my neighbor across the street has a front lawn and he has a young child who's learning how to walk. That's perfect. But what I want to ask you is, how much lawn do you want to use? Because if you are not using that lawn, you can do something better. So what do we do instead is the question. And the first answer I love, and I take it from Mike Evans, who runs a California native plant nursery in San Juan Capistrano, because from Tree of Life Nursery. And he is always saying, ugly is not a turf replacement. We don't want to take out our lawns, roll out all white gravel and a couple of succulents, because that doesn't make our houses more welcoming places to come home to. It doesn't improve our community. If you want a succulent garden, that's fine. Put in a beautiful succulent garden. But there's been a lot of things that have gone in because people feel like they're doing the right thing, and they don't end up being the beautiful welcome to coming home in a front yard, or the nice respite that you want to spend time in the backyard on the weekends or the evenings. So we'll look at some inspiration. And one of the big ideas is that we're not only going to save water, but we're going to get so much more from our landscapes if we move towards well-designed, beautiful, water-wise spaces. It can have just as much beauty and color, if not more, than any landscape they're replacing. We're going to look at a few of my favorite California native plants that do well in gardens. And these are plants that once they're established in the ground after a year or two, most of them need water in most gardens around here once a month, a good deep soak. So deeper than you would be soaking your lawn when you're watering it maybe 4 times a week, but one deep soak a month using a fraction of the total water of the lawn. And on the months that it rains, you usually don't need to water them at all. Now, caveat, if you are in Rancho Cucamonga and gardening in one of those yards where it's barely any soil and all rock, you might need to water a little bit more often. But then we're still going to be talking like every 3 weeks, not multiple times a week after things are established, in most cases for most water-wise plants. If you're going with things like lavender or Mediterranean climate plants and not California natives, it might be a little bit more often, but it's still going to be a fraction of the water use. And it can look like anything. So it can be very floriferous, or it could be kind of more calm and modern with different grasses, but these are still all California native plants. It can have elements of a traditional landscape where there's kind of hedges and ground covers in large swaths, if you like that more traditional look, but still with mostly California native plants in this picture. Or maybe a very modern style, a mix of some wildflowers and some shrubs and small trees, but staying very low water. You can embrace a cottage garden look, but using locally adapted and native plants instead of the traditional European plants for cottage gardens. It can be an informal space with a very naturalistic feel, or it can have more kind of architectural bones. This one mixes some succulents with some native plants. Or it can be very stylish. This is one done by a really talented local landscape architect who works mostly in the San Gabriel Valley, where they went as far as taking out the entire driveway, doing some structural work, putting in this kind of gravel area that really almost, looks very park-like, and then edging it with really well-selected, attractive native plants. Can be simple, or a more complex woodland, or even, again, very formal with, instead of a lawn here, using California native yarrow instead. Can embrace patio spaces, and these gardens not only look nice, they don't only use very little water, but they attract hummingbirds and songbirds and butterflies, and like this, surrounded by native sages, smell amazing. I have a fully California native front yard, and On warm days like this, once it starts to cool off some or in the morning with just the screen door open, we can smell these beautiful scented garden plants in the living room. It's great. But first, the turf needs to be dead. So a little bit of a roadmap of where we're going. Right now, we're going to cover turf removal. That is the part that needs to be done. And if you really want to set yourself up to be as low maintenance as possible, needs to be done really well at the beginning. It's not the most fun part of the process, but it is extremely important because if it's not done well, the grasses are going to come back. The thing about a lot of our grasses, not all of them, but a lot of our grasses, is that when you want them to stay beautifully green, they want to die and get patchy. But as soon as you want them to go and just completely die, put in your new landscape, if you don't do a very thorough job at making sure that things are truly dead, they're going to start coming back after you put your new plants in. And then you're going to be weeding around your new plants. The roots might get all tangled up. It might be very tough. So we're going to cover the not as much fun, but you got to do it right aspect of it. And then we're going to move on to more design, plants, those pretty pictures and that inspiring stuff. But this is the I don't know, vegetables before you can have your dessert. And the lawn doesn't need to just be mostly dead. If you take one thing from this workshop, completely kill your lawn, not resting, not dormant, dead. And to do that, you need to know a little bit about what kind of grass you have and your weeds. And the reason why this is important is because some grasses are much harder to kill than others. And so knowing a little bit about what you have will set yourself up for success with coming up with a good plan to deal with it. Grass doesn't go away by positive thinking. So, quick guide to understanding your grass type. It doesn't need to be that complicated. You can rely on a few basic principles. And there's some other good follow-up content for this at SoCalWatersmart.com. Once you go to the turf replacement rebate section, there's another guide to understanding your grass type. Some of this here as well is we're going to look at some pictures. You're not going to memorize what exactly it looks like just in this workshop, but you can either refer back to the YouTube channel. That's at cbwcd.org/YouTube, where this will be posted by next week, or also on our website at cbwcd.org/presentations. I have already posted, and it's at the top of that page right now because it's the most recent workshop, a PDF file that you can download that has the images of all these slides if you want to take it outside into your yard and take a look at it. So if you have fescue grass, and there's a few brand names, if you have like Marathon that went in from Solder Seed, that's a fescue. If you have fescue, that is what's called a cool season turf. You know it because it's green and grows all year long. And it has a relatively thick blade. It is the one that takes the most water. It's the one that people tend to think has the nicest look. And it is the one that really wants to up and die as soon as the water is cut off in Southern California. That one is the only grass type that pretty reliably can be killed from neglect and then just removing the thatch later. However, most of us, even if we started with that cool season turf, that fescue, have some amount of Bermuda grass in our lawns. That's going to be, if you have, some people have this, it's not most common, where your whole lawn, when it starts to get really cold in winter, even if there's water, even if there's fertility, kind of browns out or turns kind of tan. But what a lot of people have is they'll start at some point in time, maybe when they renovated the lawn, maybe before they bought the house, and it was a cool season fescue. But Bermuda grass is very weedy. It spreads from seed, and if you have a gardener or a garden service, those seeds get caught up in the lawnmowers. They get brought from property to property. So if you have a lawn that midwinter, when it starts getting cold, is otherwise green, and then there's just some brown patches that show up, if you look carefully, they might be a little bit stringier. They're less thick blades of grass than the fescue. In almost all cases, that's going to be Bermuda grass. And that is the stuff that is hardest to kill. If you stop watering it, it will turn brown, but it will just go dormant. It won't be dead. So then you might think it's dead. You put in your new plants, you start watering them again, even though you're watering them maybe once a week to get them established, and that Bermuda grass is going to come back. It takes quite a bit of water to be evenly green, like this picture on the left. but it can live through very low water situations and then just kind of come and go. Once it gets all tangled up in the roots of your new plants, it's really tough to deal with, to get rid of. And so then oftentimes you're really in for a lot of work, and it's harder work to do because it's all mixed in with your new plants. So if you have Bermuda grass, you really got to take care of it. And time of year matters if you have a warm season grass. There's a couple of others that will look like Bermuda's the most common. It can also go dormant in summer with lack of water. And summer, when it's actively growing, summer, early fall, spring, that's really when you have to kill it. That's the only way to know if you've gotten rid of it. If you try to kill it in the winter, you don't know if you've really gotten it. You might dig out some of it, but if there's still viable roots in the ground, because it can grow back from the roots, it might just come back in the spring. So that's just the facts. But I want to be really upfront with you and not say, hey, put in a new Waterwise landscape, it's easy, just kind of dig out as much turf as you can and go for it, because I want you to be successful. I don't want that Bermuda grass to come back on you. St. Augustine grass is another warm season grass. Most people who have St. Augustine know it because they've put it in specifically for purposes. It's a very lush green, and it is, of the turf grasses, probably the lowest water requiring one in our area. Still requires quite a bit of water, but definitely less so than the cool season fescue. It takes some doing to get out. However, it's a little bit more forgiving than Bermuda grass. You just have to be very thorough with the process. And then a few people will have kikuyu grass. It occasionally goes in as a turf grass. It's also a weed, and for all intensive purposes, you can see it looks a little bit different, but in terms of removing it, it's treated like Bermuda grass. So here's just a slide that you can refer back to about the differences in the grass blades, but this Bermuda, that's really going to be the one to keep an eye out for. And then the seed heads. Once we get to this kind of heat of summer, sometimes every week, definitely after 2 weeks of not being mowed, Bermuda grass will send up these almost like starburst looking seed heads. That's one way of really knowing that you have Bermuda. We'll do that quite quickly as soon as mowing is stopped, and occasionally even in between. And the seed heads will be pretty low to the ground. Fescue needs to grow out to be really tall. It gets these big seed heads. The reason why Bermuda is so tough is because it can reroot in the ground or spread from what are called stolons. Those are stems that creep along the ground, and you can see reroot, from rhizomes, which are roots that creep and reroot, and it can also come up from seed. You absolutely cannot kill Bermuda grass by rototilling it, and you never want to, because what happens is if you rototill it, you just rip up all of these stolons and rhizomes, and you'll set it back for a little while, but essentially you will have replanted thousands and thousands of new starts of this Bermuda grass throughout wider areas of your landscape. This is just one example. This is a picture of my front yard. Did the turf removal rebate, and I'll show a few more pictures of it later on in the workshop. And went through a thorough process of killing Bermuda grass, did everything right, did it by the book. But even then, the next spring, got to keep an eye out for this starting to come back into your new landscape. So little patches coming out. And what you're going to want to do is really just nip it in the bud. As soon as you see something like that, just get out and dig out as much as you can. And it's just a process. So for me, even doing everything correctly, the first month, or the first summer for spring into the summer, I would just have to, I knew every 2 weeks, every other weekend, I just need to get out there and spend some time digging out everything I can with a sharp garden trowel, occasionally a shovel, but usually just a sharp, kind of nicely made hand trowel. And occasionally, if I had time every week, I'd do it, but usually every other week. And then now that it's in the second summer, there's a little bit still, but it's down to once a month is where I need to go into my beautiful garden and spend maybe 10 minutes just making sure that I don't let it get out of control again. Oftentimes, like I had to do a little bit of pruning a couple of weeks ago. I just pulled out what I saw then, and I'll probably be good for a number of weeks. So it just depends on your situation and depends on how good of a job you do. I also have neighbors that have Bermuda grass lawns that sometimes go to seed. So it's just something I need to keep my eye on over time. But the garden's a pleasure to work in, and overall a lot less work than if I was mowing the lawn, every weekend in the summer. And the work is much more pleasurable. A little pruning here and there, a couple of weeds, and I come into the house smelling great. Another one to look out for is this one. I'll show some more pictures of this, but this is nutsedge. I'm not sure in the Rocky Rancho Cucamonga soils how much of a problem it is. It's a big problem in Ontario and Pomona where I live. It's something that is possibly infested in a lot of lawns, but you don't really know until you remove it, and then the nutsedge kind of starts to come back. So you can see just a few more pictures of what it looks like when it starts to sneak up. You can see a little bit at the edge along the driveway area coming in. Just showing the pictures because if you have Bermuda grass, that very well might happen. There's a few other common annual weeds to keep a look out for. So annual weeds are ones that will grow for one season. They'll spread their seeds and then they might come back again. And same thing, you see them come up. It's hard to tell if you're going to have annual grasses in your lawn until you remove the rest of the lawn. But here's some common ones, and just pull them out as soon as you see them come up. So crabgrass has seed heads a little bit like Bermuda grass, but a thicker leaf. But I mean, ultimately, you don't need to know the name of the grass. If you see that pattern, pull it out as soon as you can. And here's nutsedge. So you can kind of see this lighter color, almost yellowy green mixed in the lawn. Really hard to tell. But then when the lawn comes out, that's what comes back. They're called nutsedge because they're actually a grass-like plant. They're not a grass. They're a sedge is the category of what they are. And they have these little nuts or nutlets. And so what happens is once they've developed enough energy from photosynthesizing, from their sun exposure, the water, they'll create these. And then when you pull out the rest of it, these will stay down in the soil and they'll come back. If you have a large patch of it, the sheet mulching technique works pretty well. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about our turf removal techniques. And then once you have just a few, same thing with Bermuda grass, just pull them out as soon as you see them, and eventually you'll exhaust their energy reserve. And another one you might see is just an annual bluegrass. And then another one just to keep an eye on, depending on your garden, your neighborhood, is oxalis. That's the clover-like looking one with the yellow flower. And so with that kind of crash course in understanding what kind of turf you have, we can now talk about 4 different techniques for removing your turf. First one we're going to talk about is one that is, I guess, from an ecological or environmental perspective, one of the top ones, and that's called sheet mulching. Basically, what sheet mulching is creating a temporary biodegradable weed barrier by scavenging and acquiring cardboard boxes, layering them down with a nice overlap. If you have Bermuda grass, at least 6-inch overlap. So you can see how these large boxes are overlapped here. At least a 6-inch overlap, if not 9. And then we will go through the process. You have a couple of options. Sometimes what people will do is they'll use another technique first to knock back the grass as much as possible and then do this. You can also, depending on your time frame, just go right into sheet mulching. What you would want to do generally is if your grass is long or if very weedy, kind of cut things back so the cardboard could lay down flat. You want to water the whole area extremely well, like way deeper than just one watering of your lawn. Water it very deep, extremely well before you lay down the cardboard, because you're either going to be locking in moisture, bringing that soil to life, helping bring back in earthworms and beneficial microorganisms, or you're going to be locking in kind of the dry. So water really well. You're going to lay out your cardboard. The challenge with this is just acquiring enough cardboard for the size of your yard. So if you have an absolutely huge yard, this might not be the technique for you. Medium-sized yard, small yard, good technique. And then finding the right source to acquire your cardboard boxes. So this was a place that I lived when I was in grad school. The owner of the house owned a company that installed solar panels. It was really easy for us to use those solar panel boxes, which were great large boxes to get enough cardboard. I've talked to other people that went to a local body shop that does car repair, talked to them for their cardboard. They were bringing in bumpers and things like that in huge cardboard boxes that they were needing to pay to dispose of. Their dumpsters fill up pretty quickly. So that person was able to get great large boxes really easily. I helped another person with a design who worked at Starbucks. They had access to medium-sized boxes, but they can acquire enough in a week of all the boxes that they went through to do their whole front yard. So figuring out where you're going to get those boxes from. Right now, I have a large backyard, so I have a continuous kind of agreement with a contractor who lives about a block away from me. He installs a lot of kitchens, and whenever he has kitchen boxes, I just tell him he can drop them in my driveway. He knows the kind of boxes I want, and it works out well for both of us. So if you can get that cardboard, it's great. Get the price is right. You definitely want to use matte cardboard. So either brown or like white, not the glossy, colorful stuff that like printer boxes come in. Those don't break down as well. Lay down that cardboard with the overlap and then water that cardboard really well. You might need to water it till it won't absorb any more water. It's starting to sheet off. Leave it for 10 minutes or so, let it absorb. You might need to do that 3 times so that the cardboard's going to slump down to start to conform to the real contours, the details of the landscape. And then after that, you can do your mulch layer with wood chip mulch or gravel or whatever you're going to do. And what will happen is that will act as a temporary weed barrier. It will smother the lawn. If you have Bermuda grass, it will have some ability to kind of sneak through the edges. So if you see any come up, just pull it out right away. It will really help knock it back. If your yard is mostly dirt, then you can be ready to plant right away. If you have actively growing grass, it's better to leave this in place for maybe about 8 weeks and then do your planting afterwards. So we'll talk a little bit later about the timing of your project. And that's going to be one of the things to set you up for success is thinking through the different phases of your turf removal and planting and timing accordingly. And so that's the landscape as soon as it was sheet mulched. And then we planted about a week later. In that case, it was a small yard. We combined 2 techniques. We physically removed the lawn by digging, and then we sheet mulched to prevent any Bermuda grass from coming back because we knew it was Bermuda. And that let us confidently plant a little bit quicker. Turf removal method number 2 is solarization. This works well for wide open areas, needs to be in full sun, doesn't work in part shade. And what solarization does is you water, again, very well before, make sure that your lawn is cut pretty low, and then you lay out plastic sheeting available from the hardware store, big box store, Home Depot, Lowe's, anything like that. It's in the paint section, plastic sheeting. Sometimes it's called visqueen, and you need clear. Black doesn't work. You absolutely need clear. Mil is the thickness of plastic sheeting. 4 or 6 mil. 4 is ideal. 6 works just fine if that's what you can find. And you roll that plastic out over the landscape area. Needs to be grass. It also works with if it's just weeds as well. After you've watered, make sure that plastic is down tight. So you can use either, sometimes they're called jute staples or landscape staples like you would use to put down drip lines or erosion netting. You can use pots, little nursery pots filled with soil or rocks. You can use rocks if you use enough of them. If you're in Rancho Cucamonga, you probably have some rocks around or know someone with some rocks. Or you can also, in areas where it overlaps, you can use like old 2x4s, lumber, something like that. But you want to make sure it's tight because if the wind makes it loose and makes it flap around like a sheet, you won't get the heat because what solarization does is between the water and then this clear plastic sheeting is the soil temperature gets so hot that you are basically steam sterilizing the top 6 inches of soil, killing everything in it. Grass, weed seeds, can harm some beneficial soil microbes or insects, but often what happens is they'll just go down to the lower layers and they'll the soil and they'll recolonize quite quickly. Needs to be done during the real heat of summer, really during like, even if we have June gloom, that won't do it. This kind of weather does it, but 8 weeks, July, August into September is ideal. Minimum 8 weeks, 10 weeks isn't too much. So it needs to be somewhere where you're comfortable laying out that plastic for that amount of time, but it can be very effective. I'll say this about all the techniques. If you have Bermuda grass, which can be very deep rooted, some might come back, but this is a really great start. And then you just dig up whatever comes back. Considerations. It needs to be full sun. And then if you look over here, you can see how there's a tree right here. I probably wouldn't do it that close to a tree because if you're gaining during parts of the day that much heat, you will also harm any of the existing tree roots. So it's really great for a yard that's just wall-to-wall lawn and you want to get rid of, and you can leave it out for a while. It can be very effective. The stuff that's fried there at the end, once you pull the sheeting back, If you want to, you can hit it with like a weed whacker or a string trimmer to really kind of shred it down, but then you can just leave it in place, put your plants into it, and then your new mulch on top of it. Method number 3 is going to be physical removal. This is a method that works really well either with small yards or if you have teenage kids at home who you think need a little bit more exercise. It is very ecologically sound method, can be very inexpensive, but takes quite a bit of work, especially for Bermuda grass. You're really going to need to loosen and then reach your hands down into the soil and pull out all of the roots that you can, up to ideally a foot deep. If you have fescue, then it comes out a lot quicker. You have a couple of options. You can shake as much of the soil off of the roots as you can, which takes a lot longer, keeps your soil in place, which is ideal. It's ecologically not great to be sending good soil to a local landfill or dump, but it's also expensive. So if you have a small yard, you shake it off a bit at a time. You might even just be able to fill up your green waste bins periodically over a few weeks and get rid of that. If you're taking it out with chunks of soil, then you're probably going to need to get from the local, whatever local waste management company, a roll-off dumpster that then you would fill up and then they would pick up. That can get quite expensive, especially if you have a large yard. If you have fescue and you're good with machines, or you have a contractor or a landscaper, you can rent or have someone rent or use what's called a sod cutter, which will cut out the grass and the top 3-ish inches of soil, which has a lot of the roots, and just remove it. It's going to cost quite a bit to have all that go to the dumpster and get picked up. However, you can be done very quickly. But if you have Bermuda grass, there's going to be so many roots deeper down that the sod cutter is not really a viable technique. And then lastly, we have herbicide. And very important, but quick note, herbicide use is controversial. And so I'm providing this for informational purposes. Chino Basin Water Conservation District, Waterwise Community Center, we do not endorse or specifically recommend using herbicides. However, it is just the reality that if you go to the hardware store, if you go to the specialty landscape supply store and say, I have Bermuda grass, what should I do? They're going to hand you a bottle of this herbicide, and they're not going to give you this information that I'm going to give you. Also, I'm providing the information because I have spoken with a lot of people that say, I know the environmental stuff, but I am going to use herbicide. That's just what I'm going to do. So if you are against using herbicide, I am not specifically recommending it. However, if people are going to recommend it, I want to make sure that they use it as safely as possible, both for themselves and their environment. So with that, if you are using an herbicide for turf removal, most likely the chemical, the active chemical in it, no matter what the brand name is going to be glyphosate. That's the active ingredient, and Roundup is the most common one. And generally, only consider using this with a lot of caution for control of large areas of Bermuda grass where other approaches would not be effective under the site-specific circumstances. If you do this, always wear your proper protective clothing, long sleeve shirt, gloves, glasses, closed-toed shoes. You don't want to breathe it in or get it on you. It has been linked with cancer as carcinogenic. If you look at the scientific literature, there's arguments on both sides whether it is or not, but there have been some major trials in which people who have used this stuff for a long time and have come up with lymphoma have sued and have won millions of dollars. So just want to be very upfront about all of that. The pros of it is that it is generally effective for Bermuda grass control, but you can't just spray it once and be done with it. It needs 3 to 4 separate applications, generally over the same area. There might be a little bit less alive each time, spaced 2 weeks apart, no water hitting that grass for 48 hours after it's sprayed so it can absorb. And then after that, going back to a normal turf irrigation system. Because what could happen is if you stop watering, you won't know if it's just gone dormant from lack of water, but will still come back, or if it's truly dead. So it can work, but the cons are significant. health and environmental issues. It's also not great for pollinators. It's not great for the soil. It's relatively expensive. The plants need to actively be growing. So same thing, it can only be done in the summer, can't be done in the winter when it's already dormant for the warm season grasses, including Bermuda grass. And if it's oversprayed, which means if the spray drifts, it will kill or very significantly negatively affect other plants that it comes into contact with. So that means that we get these nice evening breezes that kind of cool things out. You got to do it when the weather is calm, because if you spray it in the evening breeze, once it's nice and cool to be outside and it sprays onto your neighbor's roses, it will kill their roses. And it's going to take several applications, and also doesn't work on nutsedge, just one other note. So just wanted you to have the full information on that. If you use it with caution. And for turf removal, this is just an intro. So if you're actually going to go through the effort to do it yourself, a bit more education will really help make sure that all the hard work you're going to put into it works out as well as possible. So to learn more, a couple of resources. And as we go through this presentation, I'm going to provide for you some other resources. On July 11th in the morning, it's going to be an online workshop that you can get to at the same web address, cvwcd.org/workshop-reg. I'm going to do a 3-hour workshop from 9 to noon, just about removing your lawn the right way. So it will cover the information we just covered and then go quite a bit deeper into it. And then also, if you go to that SoCalWatersmart.com website and go to the turf replacement program, they have not just grass identification, but some other really nice put together videos about different turf removal techniques. The only thing I want to mention with that, they're great resources, but they make it sound a little bit easier than it might actually be to kill that Bermuda grass. So just be on the lookout for that coming back with whatever technique you're going to use. So with that, let's take a quick look if we have any no open questions right now. Looks like Joanna's been doing a great job answering ongoing questions. So thank you very much. And yeah, don't hesitate.
Yeah, we do have one question from Catherine McGee. She asked, what if part of your yard is clay?
Everything that I have talked about so far applies to any soil type. I want to make sure that, Catherine, if you want to type back into the question and answer, I'm not 100% sure what part of the presentation that came in on. So if you want to give a more specific question, I'll make sure we get back to it next time that we do question and answer. There are going to be some things when it comes to selecting plants that are going to be different for clay, and we'll talk about that then. But so far, everything that we've done, includes any soil type.
Great, thank you, Scott.
And then okay, yeah. So it was a general question from Catherine. So yeah, definitely when it comes to plant selection, irrigation, things, clay does sometimes make a difference, and we will definitely have you covered on that. So other question that just came in from Jess: how long do you leave the cardboard down for sheet mulching? Answer is it depends. If you're using sheet mulching to kill actively growing lawn, 8 weeks before you plant. But okay, so I think I understand what you're saying. With the cardboard stays in place forever. So the great thing about using cardboard is that you just put your mulch right on top of it, you do your planting, and the cardboard will naturally biodegrade and just break down into nothing, just a little bit of organic matter that enhances the soil over 9 months to maybe a little over a year, depending on how much moisture, kind of local conditions, just the beneficial soil fungus, even earthworms, they just kind of process it all, and you'll come back, a year and a half later, and you wouldn't know that you've ever used it at all. It's just gone. And in doing that, it actually stimulates and benefits some of the beneficial soil microbes. So that's why cardboard is so cool. You will notice that I didn't talk at all about the plastic, kind of woven plastic, usually black weed barriers that they have at the hardware store and the landscape supply store. That is because those are an appealing solution to taking out your turf, rolling it out right away and planting. But over the long haul, what we find is that you're 4, 5, 6 farther out, what starts to happen is that even though those plastic woven products that are weed barriers are designed to allow water and air to get through them to get to the roots, especially if you have wood chip mulch that kind of breaks down into finer material over time that should be enhancing the soil, if anything, over time, those little weaves in that plastic get clogged up. And over time, what happens is that as that gets clogged up, water can't penetrate as well, oxygen can't penetrate as well. And because there's that fine layer of organic matter that's forming on top of that plastic weed barrier, weeds start sprouting on top as well. And then the last thing that happens is that it actually does start to break down in the landscape sometimes, but it doesn't biodegrade. So by year 8, usually you're pulling chunks of plastic sheeting out of your landscape that is just never going to go away. So that's why I really like the cardboard, or depending on your circumstances, cardboard is really the best, but depending on your circumstances, if you have a large area, you can even get plain brown rolls of paper, like 3 foot wide in the paint section of the hardware store. It's not as resilient as cardboard. It doesn't last as long. If you have Bermuda grass, because it's only 3 feet wide, it's the grass really gets through easier. But in certain areas and large properties, I've used it successfully, just really keeping an eye on it. So that's the great thing about the cardboard is that it breaks down over time and it actually enhances the soil. So moving on for now, I think we've done all of our questions. Oh, one more question from Jen. Can you do the sheet mulch or solar technique on compacted soil, or should you loosen the soil first? And since I know planting might be delayed, can you leave the solar in place longer than 10 weeks without damage to the soil ecosystem? Good questions. You can do it on compacted soil. If you are concerned about Bermuda grass, you might do your recompaction first. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, or your decompaction first. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if in doing that, you break up some of those Bermuda grass roots and bring them closer to the surface, then the sheet mulch should, or the solarization should be able to happen. Sheet mulch, if you know you're going to do mechanical decompaction, then do that first and then put the sheet mulch down afterwards, because that's going to be your chance. However, generally, be careful with rototilling. If you're doing like deeper hand digging, that could help. With rototilling, unless you get a really, really beefy rototiller, most of the smaller rototillers really only go down about 4 inches and are not going to decompact even for the whole root depth of like 1 gallon plants going into the ground. So oftentimes, if it's terrible, you got to do it. But if it's just like a kind of somewhat compact, from a lawn, but there's not like been trucks or anything like that parking on it, just by sheet mulching itself, bringing back kind of the biological activity that the sheet mulch helps encourage, kind of mulching with the wood chips, replacing it a little bit over a few years, that itself will do quite a bit of decompaction. So you'll need to know your site. We'll talk a little bit about drainage tests a little bit later on, but if your soil is still draining all right, even though it's a little bit compacted, I tend to err on doing less work with mechanical equipment, especially if you're going to be needing to get in something heavy that needs to drive in there. Sometimes that causes even more compaction. And then in place longer than 10 weeks, yeah, if you need to. Eventually, if the plastic is left out for months, it can start to break down in the sun because it's not super UV resistant. So you want to make sure that you roll up the plastic and dispose of it before it starts kind of shattering into little pieces, turning into microplastic in your landscape. But what happens is through the heat zone that's getting heated up, it will either kill or all of the soil microbiology and the bugs will go farther down. But it's actually been studied, and there's published studies from different universities that are heavily involved in agriculture that show that after you remove the solarization, the good guys actually recolonate pretty quickly, and the pathogens actually take a little bit longer to come back or don't come back at all, because the beneficial life in the soil recolonizes the soil faster than the pathogens. So I was pretty skeptical about that for a long time. And then reading those studies really made me much more comfortable with the solarization technique. And so with that, we will keep going. We have a lot more to cover, and we're halfway through the workshop already. But keep the questions coming in. And what I will do is at the end of the workshop, if there's more questions we haven't had time to get to, I am perfectly happy to stay later than 8. I could stay up till like 8:30 and just keep answering questions, but I want to make sure we get through the presentation. So just a quick note, we talked about turf removal, we're going to talk about plants. But one thing I don't want you to forget about, because it's something that I've seen people forget about, and then they kind of miss the easiest time to do the work, is that in almost all cases, if you're removing a lawn, you're going to need to make some changes to your irrigation system, because lawn sprinklers usually pop up between 2 and 4 inches. And once you plant your beautiful new Waterwise landscape, that's a much more diverse and interesting looking garden where plants are all sorts of different heights. Those 4-inch pop-up sprinklers, what they would end up doing is shooting water directly into the side of the closest plant. That plant will get way too much water and everything else will be too dry. And I've seen it happen time and time again where people don't do that. And then as soon as the plants start growing, things are just a mess. So you're going to need to do something to make some improvements. You have a couple of different options. You can retrofit your spray irrigation system, if it's a pretty good system with evenly spaced irrigation heads already, to be on taller risers to spray over your plants, depending on your design. Or you can install drip irrigation, highly recommending using a drip grid approach. And I'll show you some pictures in a second. There's lots of bad options. Options that are too quick and too cheap to install. I'm talking about all the 1/4-inch spaghetti tube and all the little doodads and buttons that you pop onto them and micro sprays that you can get in the aisle at Home Depot. Those often, and you just put like 1 or 2 little buttons at the base of each plant. Those don't support the plants very well long-term, because as the plants grow out and want to spread out their roots to really be drought tolerant, all the water continues to be right at the base. It doesn't work well with how the plants grow in. And what often happens is that those, in our audit program, we see all the time, we have never seen one of those systems that rely on the little thin spaghetti tube and the buttons that you plug into it. We've never seen one that doesn't have all sorts of things that have come disconnected. And as soon as that happens, you lose all your efficiency from the drip irrigation. Some plants get too much water, some plants don't get enough. So if you're really interested in how to do that, and different options showing step-by-step how to do them, you can join us for our retrofitting lawn sprinklers for Waterwise Gardens workshop. That's going to be coming up on October 3rd, or checking the YouTube video we'll post after that. And so here's just some examples. This is my front yard when it was just starting to grow in, and I did the first approach. If you are using the highest efficiency spray systems, if you are putting your sprays on tall enough risers to spray over the plants after the height that they're going to be when they've grown in, you can get almost as much kind of efficiency in terms of how much water gets to the right place as a drip system with your sprays, with the added advantage that they're much less likely to break or get cut. And so maintenance is a lot easier, to just keep your eye on things and make sure that everything is in good shape. When you turn on the system every once in a while during the daytime to make sure that things are working well, it's really easy to see and confirm and generally make your repairs if you need to. Where with drip, you might need to be hunting around more. Sometimes people don't realize that there's anything wrong until the plants start to look off. If you do drip, the kind of drip you want to use is called inline emitter. That's where you get the 100-foot roll, most of the case for homeowners. And you can see these little dots in there. Those are not just holes, but they're highly engineered emitters so that the water comes out at the same rate, the same amount along that whole line when it gets turned on. And what you want to do is you actually want to make a grid over your whole landscape where there's going to be plants. So not pathways, not patios or things like that, where the roots of the plants are going to be. And essentially that makes a nice even watering, as if it rained almost, but it's just all happening underneath the mulch layer on top of the soil layer. And so that's quite a bit of material, but if you know what you're doing, it can lay out relatively quickly. It can be easier than having to, oftentimes you can use all of the underground already that's in your lawn area. You just cap off where some of the sprinklers were and you use some adapters to go onto the drip. And that's how you go with it. It's really, really great for small areas. Like the lower right corner here, there'd be no way to use spray sprinklers effectively for an area that small. You almost have to go with drip. For wider areas, it's almost personal preference. So that gets us through what I would say is the extremely important, but a little bit less exciting information for most of us. So now we get to start looking at plants and design, which most of us find to be the more fun part. Starting with the idea that evolving to a low water landscape is really not a compromise at all. And in fact, we have such awesome plants to choose from that really grow well in Southern California that chances are our gardens are going to be more unique, more interesting, and more beautiful than the higher water plants that they're replacing. And you don't necessarily need to take out your entire lawn. It's not all or nothing. Again, it's about thinking about how much lawn you want to have, how much lawn you're going to use, and then maybe doing something more interesting with the rest of your area. So what is a water-wise plant? Water-wise plants are plants that really love life here. They might be native to Southern California, but they also could be from other similar climates. And what do they have in common? Well, they probably do more for us than the plants they're replacing. California native plants tend to provide valuable wildlife habitat for pollinators, birds, and butterflies. And together, they make your yard into an exciting place where something's always changing. And that's one of the things I love about working with water-wise plants is that a nice lawn is kind of the opposite of that. You're always working really hard to try to keep it looking the exact same way through all seasons of the year. Where with water-wise and native gardens, it's the opposite. You're really embracing the seasons. And you can have a California native garden where there are flowers all year round, which also bring hummingbirds and butterflies to your garden pretty much all year round. There's always something going into bloom, always something going out of bloom, always something doing something new. And our water-wise and full sun growing native plants tend to have adaptations, which is why they are water-wise. Those are commonly either gray or silver leaves. They might be glossy or leathery or thick leaves. They might be fuzzy leaves. And some of them have what I call sleepy summers, which means some of them, once they're established, you don't need to water them at all for them to live. But if you don't, this is how they live up in our local mountains and foothills. They'll kind of shrivel up a little bit. They won't die, but they'll go dormant in the summer. And that's fine if they're in the wild, but in our front and backyards, usually want them to look a little nicer. But all we need to do for most of those plants is give it a good deep watering once a month in the months that it doesn't rain. And that's enough supplement that things are going to be looking pretty nice year round. They might not be peak springtime all year, but they can go through their cycles and really have a quite nice look throughout much of the year, if not the entire year. And if you're really someone who wants things to look a certain way all year round, you just have to choose the plants that have that effect, and there's plenty to choose from. And one of the cool things about all of these adaptations, whether it's the gray leaves or the fuzzy leaves, is that they give plants a really great look that's fun to use in design as we think about it. So this is a picture from same front yard that I've shown a few pictures of. This is when it's a little bit more grown in. And so on the left, this is a native plant called fragrant pitcher sage that has that fuzz. And when you catch it at just the right time of day where it's backlit, so this is a morning picture, it glows. And so you can kind of see that glow in the picture, but in real life, it's even more stunning. So a lot of cool stuff to play with. But here's the issue. It used to be really simple. You'd have a lawn, maybe a shade tree, maybe a couple of roses, maybe a lavender plant, and a hedge. That's just green. So we have so many more exciting choices now. We have hundreds of choices, but it doesn't need to be super complicated. So what I want to encourage you to do is get excited, but keep it simple. Collectively, I feel like we're in search of what's the new default, what's the new lawn, hedge, and roses. And I'm not a native purist. I love to grow fruit trees at home. I have vegetable gardens. But I propose that easy to grow, low water California native plants are kind of the new default. If we have plants that are beautiful, that are perfectly adapted to Southern California, that provide habitat for butterflies and songbirds, why wouldn't we use those as the base? And then if we want something else specific, if you love lavender, add that in. Or if you like succulents, go with succulents, but maybe mix in some of those California native plants to have a really nice kind of balancing effect overall. So where do we start with this? Well, get inspired, then consider what you want, and then check that with considering what you want to maintain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Set your goals for your project. What are you trying to get out of your landscape renovation project? Then you're going to research and you're going to plan, and then you're going to build it, and then you're going to enjoy it, and we're going to be here to help you with the information you need every step of that way. And remember, plants are the most exciting part, but the right plants are only part of the formula for success. So I'm going to keep giving you other resources. And if you're really going to take this on yourself, combine things. The function of tonight as an introduction class is to give you some of the most valuable information, but also kind of open your eyes to what additional information you're going to need to be successful, because it's doable, but it's not so simple that we can teach you every single thing you need in 2 hours. So let's talk about choosing plants. There's a concept that I want to introduce to you, which is going to be your most important concept. And that is put the right plants in the right place, which is a shorter way of saying match your plant to the conditions of the soil and the site that you're on. I don't believe that there's such a thing as someone having a green thumb or someone having a brown thumb. So really the difference is that certain people decide they're going to learn some about their plants and do that research and make sure that they're putting the right plant in the right place, the right conditions. They learn what those conditions are, and they read up on how to maintain their plants. That's what having a green thumb is. You need to be willing to do that a little bit. So the most important factors in that are the sun and shade requirements of the plant. If that plant wants full sun, that literally means, doesn't necessarily mean all day. It literally means 6 or more hours of direct sun. If the plant says it needs part shade, you can't put it in full sun in Rancho Cucamonga or any of our inland valley areas and expect it to do well. But if the plant says it needs full sun, same thing. You can't just cram it in the shade because you like that plant. You need to put it in the right conditions. Drainage and soil type is important. Most of our water-wise and native plants want what's called, quote, well-drained soil. And well-drained soil is something that if you're in the rockier parts of Rancho Cucamonga, you will have. If you're in the clay soil parts of Rancho Cucamonga, you might not have. What you can do is you can dig a few holes in your garden about a foot deep and a foot wide and do some drainage tests. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to fill that hole with water a few times. And after you've done it a few times to make sure that all of the soil around that hole is evenly wet, you're going to fill it up again and you're going to time it. And you're going to roughly get an average using a ruler or a measuring tape of how many inches per hour that water is draining through that hole. If it's 2 inches of water an hour or more, you have well-drained soil, you're good. All those plants that want well-drained soil, you're fine. If it's between 1 and 2 inches, you're medium. And you can get away with doing most of the plants that want well-drained soil. If we happen to have a series of huge storm events, it might have a few things that sulk a little bit. You might lose a couple of plants, but in general, you're fine. If it's close to 1 inch per hour of drainage or less, which for most people, it's going to be either clay soil or heavy compaction, you're okay. You just need to focus on plants that are well adapted to clay soil. You're not going to change your soil type. If you have clay, you're never going to add as much sand as you would need to change your soil type. You'll just make it worse. You'll basically mix up concrete. Go with lists of plants for clay soil, and I'm going to show you a resource that has a great list in just a moment. Size is super important. Read up on how wide and how tall your plants are going to get, and know that they will get that tall and that wide, sometimes in a couple of years, sometimes in a single year. If you cram too many plants together because you're not taking those sizes seriously, what's going to happen is things are going to rapidly start to get overgrown. And then you're going to have to do a lot more work cutting things back. The forms of the plants won't look as nice. So even though if you plant it right, things might look too far apart at the beginning, trust in your research, things will grow in, sometimes quite quickly. And then also their water needs. That's also, the technical term is called hydrozoning. Low water plants with low water plants. If you have an existing tree that needs medium water, group the irrigation for that tree with medium water plants. High water plants, go with high water plants. So don't put your roses and your California native plants to be watered at the same time from the same irrigation zone. You need to provide some separation, and you can do that with either drip or spray. But if you end up with weird shapes of where you want those lines to be drawn between the boundaries of those water types, then drip irrigation is a really good way to go for that. After those basics, getting our plants, right plant, right place, we can start to think about other aspects of the design, including, and most importantly, leaf color, leaf texture and shape, the structure and form and density of the plant. Is it an arching plant? Is it very upright? Is it a low ground cover? And for some of our trees and shrubs, even bark texture and color. You'll notice that I didn't put flower color on this. And if you're really interested in flower color, by all means, go for it. But the thing about flower color is that for most plants, that might be between a couple of weeks and a couple of months a year. But the contrast between the leaf colors and the leaf textures, whether it's a fine and lacy or a broadleaf, that happens 365 days a year. So one of the kind of secrets to professional landscape design is you focus your color, your contrast more on the form and the leaves of the plant. And then when it shows up, the flower color is like the icing on the cake. And to do that, visual design often relies on contrast. So forms of the plants may be an ornamental grass next to a shrub, then repeated in ornamental grass. Layering, so that's, underneath your trees, you're having shrubs and ground covers as things grow in. And repetition, so not 172 different cool plants, but for most front yards, 12 to 15 maybe different plants at the most for most of us, unless you're going to be a hobbyist gardener and really want to learn every little detail about all your plants. And then using those plants in the right place and repeating them creates more of a coherent sort of design layout. And so the Waterwise Community Center, Chino Basin Water Conservation District, has created a website that we're going to do a quick demo of that's just about choosing those plants, helping you. And this is created specifically for our Inland Valley areas. It's called it's called the Inland Valley Garden Planner, and it's at inlandvalleygardenplanner.org. And this has detailed plant profiles of a searchable database of 350, a little over 350 native and waterwise plants. And so there's different ways to get that information. The real core of it is called the Plant Finder. So to develop your plants you're interested in, your plant list, these 350 plants, it's not every plant you can get, but it's most of the plants available that you can find at even a specialty nursery that has waterwise plants. We'll talk later about where to get these plants. And then if you really want to get into, for example, like California native plants, you'll find additional stuff at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, not in here. You can find the information about those plants other places online, but oftentimes we'll have like a cousin of those plants, a similar plant where you can get the information. So for example, say that you want a shrub that's California native, you want it low water, it's going to be in full sun, and you want it to be good for butterflies and bottom, for those of you who have clay soil or slowly draining soil from some compaction, plants for clay soil. So now you just went from 350 plants down to our top 10 recommended plants specifically for this local area that meet all of those conditions. And from there, then you can start to research each one. Some of them are going to be bigger. Some of them are going to be smaller. So shrubs, for example, Toyon here, that's a 15-foot tall shrub, where brittle bush is a 3 to 4 foot shrub. And so for each of these plants, then you can click on them. You get a full profile, images you can scroll through, close up, farther away, getting a real understanding of what it looks like, a description, has the size, the water needs, an irrigation schedule of what it's most likely going to need for most gardens around here. We give that information in inches of water because everyone's irrigation system puts out water at a different rate. And one person's irrigation system might put out water 4 times as fast as another one. Inches is like rainfall. That's actually responds to the plant's needs based on the weather, the region. And then if you want to understand more about how long you run your specific irrigation system to do that 1 inch of water 1 time a month in June, for example, we have some links and even some custom calculators that we put in there to help you figure that out. Then you get just the quick information. This also has the adaptations. For example, this one is good at taking wind, heat, drought, all day sun. You also see that it's well draining and clay soil are good, flower season, all that. And then once you put it in, you or your gardener are going to need to know how to maintain it. One thing about these plants is that most gardeners right now still, if you have a garden service, don't really know the maintenance for all these plants. It's simple, but you're going to want to provide them with this information, maybe a picture of each plant so they know what to do in each season, because some of them, of the Waterwise plants, some grow more in the spring, some grow more in the fall. A lot of times they just need to be cleaned up once a year, but you need to do it right before when they're about to push out their new growth. So these maintenance recommendations help a lot. So that's the search heart of it. If all of that is still a little bit overwhelming for you, you can go to the section with garden styles. And here we have we have 8, and pretty soon, probably early next month, we're going to have 8 more pre-coordinated plant palettes where all of these plants work well together to give you a specific cohesive look along a different theme. And then you're going to get all those plants chosen to work well together. You probably wouldn't put in all of the plants, but you can pick and choose from there, know that they're all compatible, and then you can get the information about each one. And then finally, I also wanted to put in, there's helpful lists. So from these lists, there we go. It was taking a moment to load. We're getting a little bit of delay. Bear with me. So I'll keep talking and then the visualization for the list. There we go. So from these lists, a few to note: our favorite plants for inland gardens. This is, of those 350, these are our favorite top plants for home landscapes in this area. In Rancho Cucamonga, a lot of you have slopes, so we have a plants for slopes list that have roots that are known to be good at helping stabilize slopes, prevent erosion. For example, if you need to know plants that are good for hedges or screens, plants for butterflies, plants that are good for birds and wildlife, all sorts of different things in here. So that's another resource. And then final thing I'll mention before we move on is you can also create your own login. And what you do is you just fill something out, you set up your password, you put in your email address. I'm the only person who has access to those emails. I don't share it with anyone. It's really just so if you lose your password and to authenticate that you're a real person. That's the only reason. And when you create an account, you can save as many lists as you want. So if you have 2 different ideas for your front yard, and then you're keeping track of the plants in your backyard, and you have ideas for your grandma's house, you can create them and you can save plants to those individual lists and do a few other cool things. So that's the Inland Valley Garden Planner. Hope you check it out. And with that, let's get back into the presentation. And so what we're going to do in just a minute is we are going to then use that information and kind of pull it all together into one example, running you through an example of how to put together a design. So construction planning. Here's the important thing. Make sure you consider it. I've talked to a lot of people where they get excited, they'll take out their turf, they'll buy a bunch of plants, and then they'll realize that they don't have a plan for how they're actually going to pull it all together. So even just considering it will help set you up for success. Are you going to do that construction for whatever you're planning on taking on all at once in phases, or a bit at a time when you find the time? That's how I build my landscapes at home, just kind of weekend work. And sometimes if I want to make a big push, I'll maybe take a couple of vacation days and really focus, take a long weekend to do that. Any way is fine. If you're bringing in a contractor, do you have a budget to have them do it all at once? Or are you going to do it in phases? You want to plan to plant in the best season. This is critical. Just because these are water-wise plants and they're adapted to life here doesn't mean you should plant them in the middle of the summer, because when they're coming out of their little nursery pots and their highly organic potting soil and they've been getting water every day in the nursery, they need time to adjust and to get rooted in and to settle in. So even our water-wise plants, if you're planting just like cactus, you can, even that's not ideal, but you can get away with planting in the summer. But other than that, our great Mediterranean and native plants, really mid to late fall is the best time to plant. Into the winter, early spring is okay. But once you get to April, even the problem with April is that if you have a hot late May, early June, like we do, plants haven't really rooted in that much yet. And so you can really set yourself up for success by planting, I consider, like right before Thanksgiving to a little bit after. Before Thanksgiving to a little bit after Christmas, that's really the sweet spot for actually getting your plants in the ground. What will happen is some plants will get growing right away, but oftentimes you won't see a lot of growth on the top, but the plants will be rooting in, they'll be getting settled. And then as soon as the heat's really on in spring the next year, then things will just really get going. If you stick to that schedule, you can pretty reliably, for the Waterwise and native plants, give them a good deep watering once a week the first year. Second year, start to taper off some usually, as long as they're growing well. And somewhere between 2 and 3 years, move to that once every 3 weeks, once a month kind of water schedule. For the natives, maybe twice a month for the more kind of mixed Mediterranean climate kind of stuff. It's a good time for you to be thinking about first steps now, because summer is the perfect time, like we spoke about, for contemplating design, for getting your turf killed, preparing irrigation, and then you move into fall and actually get your planting done. Work within your budget, think about your budget, and adjust your design and phasing as necessary. And if you're working with a contractor, bring your contractor in early, or you always want to try to get, unless you have an existing relationship with a contractor, 3 separate bids, check references, make sure that they've done jobs the size, if you're doing a whole front yard or a backyard, that they've done jobs, see pictures of those jobs, talk to a few people that have worked with them, ask for references, but bring them in early. Make sure you understand what the costs are going to be. If you get 3 bids from contractors, they can be all over the place sometimes. And if they're a good contractor, they might be busy. So bring them in early, make sure that you can get on their schedule to be doing this in the best time of the year. And so let's do an example of bringing this all together into a design. So this is going to be just a short example of the design process from the front yard where I live now in Pomona. So our soil is a little bit different than most of Rancho Cucamonga, but overall climate very similar. And where I always start is with a roughly drawn base plan and my goals. So this is my front yard, not huge, about 1,200 square feet. Here's the driveway. We're on a cul-de-sac, so that's why it's kind of curved here. That's why the front yard is kind of a wedge shape. Neighbors' gravel strip, and then their driveway. And this doesn't need to be perfectly to scale. Usually how I'll draw this is I will pull up on a computer screen, Google Maps, and I'll type in my address and I'll zoom in. And then there's a little square you can click and it gives you an aerial photo. And it's amazing how much detail you can get. It's almost scary if you've not seen it before, but it's very useful as a design tool. And then if I wasn't doing this for a digital presentation, I would just draw it on a blank sheet of white paper. Usually the first couple of times it'll be kind of off. And then I just want the shapes to be relatively similar to how they are in reality. It doesn't need to be all measured out. By the third one, I'll have something that's pretty good. And after I have that one down, I'm not going to draw on it anymore. I'll either photocopy it a bunch of times, or I'll scan it and print it a number of times, or most often I just have a pad of tracing paper and I'll use tracing paper. Because once I spend the time to draw my base plan, how I like it, I want to be able to really freely draw design ideas out. And I know I'll change things. I know I'll throw some of them away, and I don't want to have to redraw that base plan more than once. So put in the most important features. So for a front yard, that's going to be your driveway, planting area, where your water meter is, and then if you know where your water main runs, definitely there. In most cases, if you're planting mostly small plants, you're not going to run into issues. In mine, the water main was replaced and it wasn't done well, and it was only 6 inches deep. So I wanted to know where that is. I don't want to put a big tree right on top of it. Where your doors are, and then also where your windows are is important, because for a lot of us, our front yard, we see it when we're driving up, but if we don't spend a lot of time in our front yard, the windows from the house that look out into the front yard might be the main way that we're actually interacting with and enjoying our front yard landscapes. Same thing with the backyard. If you design with an eye towards how it's going to interact with the inside of the house as well, that's going to really make your landscape do a lot for you, whether or not you're outside. And so just getting those basic aspects in. I'll also put where the main ridges of the house are, because that's going to determine my site analysis later on when I try to sketch out where the water is going to flow when it rains. And you can usually pretty clearly see that in Google Earth. Then I'll also write down, again, oftentimes on a piece of paper that I keep nearby, my goals for the garden, because you want to constantly refer to those. Make sure you're not getting distracted, putting in too many different kinds of plants, really focusing on your goals. So for example, for here, the goals were, we wanted it to be beautiful. We wanted to provide a lot of habitat for pollinators, songbirds, hummingbirds, butterflies. We want it to be low water. And there's a lot of small front yards on a cul-de-sac. So the front and looking out of our front windows feels like a little bit like a fishbowl. Instead of just looking across the street because of the angles, we see 5 different houses, and 3 of them are pointed kind of right at any one spot in the front yard or the windows that face out. So we wanted to kind of have a balance of enhancing our sense of privacy without just putting up a big hedge and really turning our back to our neighbors. Wanted to have that great sense of smell that I mentioned earlier with our California native sages and some of our other native plants. And it just so happens there's not a lot of street trees in our neighborhood, which is not great. It's quite hot, but the front of our house and the front yard faces north. So we have a great view of the mountains. And so we wanted to enhance that sense of privacy, but also make sure we're working with the sizes of the plants and where we put our taller plants and smaller plants to keep our great view of the mountains that we happen to have. And so that's that base plan. Doesn't need to be a work of art. From that, you move into site analysis, which is just a fancy way of putting down your observations on paper. Observe for as long as it takes. If this is your first year on a property, you might wait till a full year, at least get through a couple of rainstorms to see if there's water issues where the water pools up. But you really want to put down your sun and your shade, soil and drainage, we talked about. Do your test, make sure you have good drainage, or if you have areas with bad drainage, put that down. Your views, both your views off of your property that you might want to maintain, or note views onto your property that maybe you would want to block. If your neighbor put on a tall addition that looks directly into your backyard now, you might have a section that you want to jot down. I'd like to put in a tree or some tall shrubs that give us a little more privacy. Where water flows when it rains, if it pools up, or if there's any areas that kind of flood. If there's any particularly hot or cold areas, those are called microclimates. So one example is if you have your house is stucco and there's a planting area where it faces west, so the area gets blasted by the afternoon sun. Maybe there's an asphalt driveway that's on one side of it and a stucco wall on the other side. That area is going to be super hot. That might be an area where you focus on plants that are from the desert, can really take in all that heat and just respond a lot of our desert plants with more flowers. They're really well adapted to it, as opposed to something that won't like living there. Right plant, right place. If there's noise or other neighbor issues, you can note that down. And then if there's existing plants that you want to keep, if you have a medium water use large tree, then even if you're going kind of more water wise, that tree is going to still need some water, but it's a long-term investment. I'm not telling you to get rid of that tree by any means. And so note that down, and that might start to give you ideas of where to group your medium water use plants with the tree, where to group your lower water use plants. And so this is what the site analysis looks like for this area. So here's our mountain view that we want to keep. Feels too open in this area. This is our main planting area. You can see one thing that we did have, and so we're glad that we got through a winter, is even though there's just a gentle slope this way, all this water comes off the roof here, here, here. And because there's a gentle slope this way, and the conditions of having the concrete walk here, this whole area would flood during a rain event. We don't have gutters on our roof. And because of the way the eaves are shaped, it'd be difficult to put them in. So that's something that we're going to address. We're going to find a way in our design to turn that flooding issue into a resource where we hold on to water really well. We let it infiltrate into the ground through something that looks nice, and we solve our flooding issues. And then because this faces north, and because in the winter in our part of the world, the sun is lower in the south in the winter, somewhat in the fall, and then is high overhead midday in the summer, what happens is the north side of a building or of a house is in quite a bit of shade most of the year for a number of feet out. But then come summer, it's blasting sun overhead. And so there's plants that are adapted to that, but you need to select the right plants for that. And so that's something that we're going to note down. And so that's basically our site analysis, and that sets up how we're going to set up our design. So design doesn't happen in a vacuum. You can be creative if you want to. You can be a very literal person that just does the analysis and finds the right plants if you want to. But the best design doesn't come out of nowhere, because that design isn't successful in the long term. It's really based on this iterative process of getting your ideas down and then starting to go into kind of your concept. And so to solve those issues of feeling too open, we knew that we were going to want a couple of small trees here. One of them in this area, we knew we wanted it to be evergreen, to always be in full leaf, to always provide that privacy. out here, we thought we can have one that is maybe a spring flowering tree that then can lose its leaves part of the year, but we're going to have it be a nice multi-branch tree. So it can be a little bit more open sometimes more closed. But then on this side, most of our windows, because of the angles really out here, just kind of look into our neighbor's driveway. And so we're going to put an informal hedge, something that can really provide us some more privacy, but will be low enough that we'll still get our main mountain view over the top of it. Even going so far as to look at these windows, and if we put a bird bath here, then our cats that are indoor cats will be able to see the bird bath and enjoy the sights from both of these windows in the house where they spend a lot of time. We decided that we were going to want a meadow in the middle, and then we'd have some room for kind of colorful 3 to 5 colorful shrubs. And so we're starting to build some depth to our landscape. For example, we know that we drive up and we want it to look nice, but most of our experience of the landscape actually happens through looking out these windows. So for example, right now, these days, I'm working remotely. I am sitting right here, looking out into the landscape, and it's beautiful. So we're building our depth with smaller plants in the front from the main area that we look at. The meadow is low. Our accent shrubs are going to be a middle layer, and then our hedge and our small trees are going to be the back layer. So in a relatively small space, by carefully using design to build those layers, we're making the area feel a little bit deeper than it actually is, a little bit larger than it actually is, through careful layering of different sizes of plants. And then a couple last things you'll note. There's not necessarily a convention, but just the ways that I found it useful to put together this drawing. There's some areas that says C. Those are going to be spots where we know we want a lot of color. So for example, with this hedge, we're going to make it kind of curve and leave a little corner here where we can put some smaller flowering little perennial plants. So again, we don't want to totally turn our back on the neighborhood. So nice little spot of color for the neighbors and anyone walking by to enjoy. Same thing over here. And then down this driveway as well during the kind of walk-up experience. So our meadow is going to be a little simpler, and then our real colorful small plants along here. And then finally, for the drainage solution, we put in what's called a French drain, which looks a little bit like a dry stream bed, but we didn't really have the width of the landscape area to put that in where we needed to have our drainage. So French drain is kind of a trench that you dig, and then you fill it with a coarse gravel so that the water can move through the depth of that gravel. We set something up to go around the side, and then to a series of dry stream beds along our actual backyard. So if you're interested in learning more about that sort of process in the winter, when it's a little bit rainier, we're going to teach a class that's water harvesting for home landscapes, where we'll really go through all of those different options. And that is basically at that stage. So at this stage, I'm not doing my exact planting plan. I'm really kind of zoning things out, what I'm going to want. Because once I have something like this, then I can go back to the Inland Valley Garden Planner with these requirements. I know I need 2 small shrubs or 2 small trees. I know I need a hedge. I know I need 3 to 5 shrubs, and then some smaller plants. And then I can put in all those factors into the search and really develop my plant list. If it's just a blank slate, no thoughts about design yet, then it's a little bit more overwhelming to come up with the plants, and I might not even be choosing the plants that I actually need. So the design comes first, and then choosing the exact plants comes later. And so from there, then I start to choose exact plants. So for example, we decide Toyon's going to be our evergreen. It's really a large shrub, but it can prune up into a tree. Western redbud's going to be the other one. Here's the couple of species we'll do in the informal hedge. And then starting to see, you can see now my number of accent shrubs has changed some. It's another level of detail, but I'm starting to understand these exact plants that I want. Still not placing exactly individual plants yet, but coming up with the list and putting them down. And then if you are inclined, what you can do is then you can put it to scale. So for those of you who are going to draw it all out on graph paper, which I encourage, that'll really help you get your exact plant counts. Here's a great resource for it. It was created by the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, partially funded by Cucamonga Valley Water Agency, or Cucamonga Valley Water District, sorry, and some other regional water providers. And there's a lot of great information in here. You can download it I set up a small link for it. It's right here, tinyurl.com/IE landscape guide. It'll load the whole document. So depending on your browser, it will probably take a while. It'll load the whole thing, and then you could just do a save as, and it will save this PDF document. In that document, it's going to have a lot of specific information about some specific plant recommendations. To be quite honest, I don't love all of the specific plant recommendations in it. I feel that some of them are a little bit more adapted to more coastal gardens. They'll grow in inland empire, but they're going to take a little bit more water. There's plenty of really great lower water use plants that I would encourage you to think about. But starting on page 46 of this document, it's really by far the best example that I've seen of how to really make simple the process of drawing out your yard on graph paper, on starting to think through how you might do kind of capturing water, what you do with that extra soil, just the basic kind of stuff, and then moving into drawing out your exact planting plan to that scale so you can get all of your exact plant counts. That will appeal to some of you. For those of you who it doesn't appeal to, if you want to work more intuitively, kind of feel things out, you can do that. Some people, if doing the process required this, they just are not going to do it. So if you're that type, if you're kind of a more intuitive, creative type, then I might suggest you can go to the landscape supply store. You can get by the 100 pack little flags that are on a piece of wire, like for marking sprinklers, and you can get them in different colors, and you can draw right on them in Sharpie, and you can start to say, okay, I have a 5-foot shrub here, put a little flag, write the name on it, and then you can measure out in place where your next plant's going to be, where your next plant's going to be, even if you don't do all of your plants. For those who don't like to do kind of the math and the paperwork, that's a good way to go. You might need to make a few more trips to the nursery as you're getting more plants. If you buy a few too few, if you buy a few too many, if you don't have it all drawn out on graph paper, then you'll have some plants to give to friends or family. Either way, whatever's going to work best for you. So I do a lot of landscapes. I have a computer program and did this. But even from doing this helped me get my plant count. But as I still did another level of refinement, even after I ordered some of the plants, and kind of moved things around on site as we went through last details. So I'm going to show you just the example of that process, and then we'll do another round of question and answer, and then move into the final part of the presentation. So this was the house right at the beginning, around when we moved in. And my partner is a professional horticulturist as well, very passionate about California native plants. So we weren't going to be having a lawn for very long. And it was that Bermuda grass lawn with plenty of other weeds in it. So went through the process of killing the lawn. And this is actually when we applied for our turf removal rebate. So when you do that, the thatch needs to be there. It doesn't need to be a green lawn. They don't want you to turn the water on and use a bunch of water to green it up. If it's all weeds, if it's down to dirt, you can't get that turf removal or turf replacement rebate, but this will qualify. And then we just had a few annual weeds left, which we knew that we're going to sheet mulch, so that's fine. So this is March 2019. Laying out the plants. And this, because we had a little meadow area, which has some small plants, this is actually a pretty high planting density. Depending on the plants that you choose, you might have even fewer plants and still have something that will grow in lush and beautifully. So you can see my partner Kira starting to put plants in. I'm taking a break, taking pictures because I always get too far along and then forget to take pictures. You can see our French drain. That's that trench that's already dug that I mentioned. And our plants laid out. That's after it's planted, before we got the mulch down. And so like any well-planted landscape, and you don't need to buy large plants. In fact, most plants will grow better by planting them smaller. So we planted all 1-gallon plants, March of 2019, and it doesn't look like much. So a lot of people at this point would think, oh my God, it's never going to grow in. I need to buy twice as many plants. Just hold on. So got our mulch delivered, doing our sheet mulch process. Depending on the situation, sometimes it's better to sheet mulch first. Sometimes it's better to sheet mulch after. We just happened to not have a schedule that really allowed us to sheet mulch ahead of time. You'll notice that it was March, so we were already on the tail end of really the planting season. We would have loved to plant earlier, but we only moved into the house in October. So it took us quite a while. We had a bunch of work to do on the house. And so this is May. So it's approximately 2 months. And so you can see the plants have started to grow. They're still quite small, but they're starting to grow in. And the mulch is doing pretty well. I had to do a little bit of follow-up weeding. about 2.5 months. You can see I still came in and brought in some more rocks to make it more ornamental, but you can see the irrigation is fixed up. The French drain is in, starting to grow a little bit more. And then August of that year, one hot day, we had the screen door open and just kind of walked by and realized that you barely see any mulch anymore, that it was green all of a sudden at about 5 months. So still have a lot more growing to do. You can see that's one of our 2 small trees and still have a lot more growing to do to give us some of that privacy. But all of a sudden it was a garden, not a construction site anymore. So this is at about 5 months. All these 1-gallon plants are really starting to grow in already. Have our native California fuchsia, loves hot, full sun, brings hummingbirds, blooms late in the summer into fall. You can see this is our Western redbud, one of our trees, and this pattern is actually native leafcutter bees, great pollinator. They don't sting, but they will take thin leaves and they will chew the edges of them and use that to make their nests, which people hardly will ever find. But that's habitat and in action. Doesn't harm the plant at all, but wouldn't have expected quite so quickly. We have these native pollinators showing up. And in our whole area, it truly is, if you build it, they will come. And so you can see part of our French drain starting to grow in about 5 months. We got the front yard certified as a wildlife habitat, which is something you can do through the National Wildlife Federation. If your yard provides food, water, cover, and places to raise young, so that's some amount of shrubbery usually for birds. And then August of that year, starting to look quite nice. And it really is, if you build it, they will come. So started to notice, I am a creature of habit. I sit on my couch and eat oatmeal for breakfast almost every morning, and started to notice on this one dried, but still kind of nice looking leaf stalk of this native California fescue, ornamental grass, there was a hummingbird that would come around. And for almost a couple of months, every single morning, she would come. She would rest on this one leaf stalk that was right outside the living room window. I get to see it when I was eating my breakfast in the morning. And hummingbirds hunt a lot of gnats. They drink nectar, but they also get their nutrition from gnats. So I'd see her fly off. She'd hunt something. She'd come back. She'd rest. And so the garden really starting to, like I say, the Waterwise and native garden will do a lot more than your lawn. Really, first year, already starting to do that. So just love having that right outside my garden. So you can see this is our garden on trash day. So I'm crouched a little bit down for this perspective, and but really starting to look quite lovely. You can see the flowers of different kinds. You can see the leaf contrast really starting to come in. Not every landscape is perfect, and you will always lose a couple of plants. Don't beat up on yourself if you do. Happens in every landscape. Those glossy magazines or gardens on Instagram or whatever, there's always a dead plant in those landscapes too. The professional photographer just doesn't take a picture of it. So what you do is, okay, I wonder why this plant isn't doing well. Is there a problem with the irrigation? Is it the wrong plant for the wrong place? And then just go from there. And so this is at about 6 months for this front yard, and quite well on its way. It's grown in a lot since then. And if you want to see more pictures of the front yard and how it grew in, on YouTube, we have posted our recent California native landscape design or California native garden design workshop. And we go into more depth, see updated pictures, and we go through this design example, but really go into a lot more content about native design. But yeah, at less than a year, already coming along. And so with that, why don't we answer some questions? Then we'll do a little bit more content, and then we will conclude and answer the rest of the questions. So let's scroll down. So I have a couple of questions from Sheena. Since killing turf now is a good time, say with manual labor and cardboard, should I mulch now until fall to prevent weeds and keep soil healthy? Or, okay, so you're gonna take out the turf now and then wait for fall. Great question. What I would do if I'm digging it out is dig it out, put down the cardboard, put down the mulch. Somewhere in that process, do your irrigation work, whatever you're gonna do. If you are doing drip irrigation, you're gonna wanna make sure that that gets down before you put down your cardboard. So you might need to get pretty far into your design to know exactly where that's going to run, because if you have a pathway or a patio or something like that, you're not going to want to do the irrigation there. If you're doing sprays and just putting them on taller risers, you might start doing that, but you're going to want to do that work and then water it every once in a while through the summer, maybe, so the soil doesn't get completely bone dry, and keep an eye out for weeds. And that'll let you do your mulching, do your turf removal, and then still give you a few months to, if weeds start coming back, you can really pull them out and nip that in the bud before you put your plants in. So that's great. Yeah, if you want to, you could also tear it out, water some, try to flush any more weeds, do that, and then sheet mulch after. Just depends on your preference. So that's the only questions we have right now, and we'll move on, and then we'll have more time at the end. So we just talked about mulch. Mulch is some place where I oftentimes see people go wrong, so wanted to mention that some. Mulch really just means anything that's covering and shading the soil. So it could be wood chips, it could be gravel, it could be what's called decomposed granite. That's all different types of mulch. Sometimes you might hear like wood chip mulch is called organic mulch because it's organic matter, it breaks down. Gravel or decomposed granite might be called mineral mulch or inorganic mulch because it doesn't break down, it's rock, it's mineral. It should match what the plants you want or are going to put in want and the look you want. So in general, even if you're working with native plants, if it's kind of a woodland kind of theme or a meadow, that's going to be more at home with wood chips. If you have fruit trees or things that like rich soil, that's wood chips. If you have desert plants or natives from really rocky or dry areas, then gravel or decomposed granite kind of mulch might be more appropriate. Or you can have some areas that are wood chip and some areas that are gravel or decomposed granite. Wood chips have the advantage that they will add organic matter to the soil over time. If you have plants that want that, if you have desert plants, they don't really care, they don't need it. But over time, you will have to refresh it as it breaks down. Where gravel and decomposed granite, you put it in once and then it's there. But if you don't have enough plants in your landscape and you have a lot of gravel and just a few plants here or there, not these kind of more filled in landscapes like I've been showing, then it might just seem extra hot and extra dry. So don't shy away from gravel or decomposed granite if that's what's going to match the look of your plants, but just make sure you put enough plants in. Or even if it's desert plants, there's some great desert trees that then, like Palo Verde, for example, is perfectly at home with that, but then will still provide a little bit of shade. And then if needed, like for California native plants, a lot of the ones that I have in my yard, they don't really need wood chips, but they're going to grow. You saw how much it grew in the first year. So I wasn't going to invest in putting in a whole bunch of gravel anyways, because I would just get covered up by plants. And so I just did wood chips for the first year. And now in most of that area, you can't see it. I'll never have to put more wood chips down, but the plants are just going to start kind of slowly over time with just their leaf turnover mulching themselves. And I might only need to touch up a little bit of mulch in like an area that's a pathway. So that's a quick advice on mulch. If you're going to do gravel or decomposed granite mulch, this is the approach that I recommend. This was just someone who walked into the Waterwise Community Center to visit our garden, but he had done this himself. If I remember correctly, I think he lived in Rancho Cucamonga. I'm not 100% sure, but we were talking about his garden, and then he showed me the picture on his phone, and this is about the best I've ever seen in terms of a do-it-yourself project that uses a gravel mulch. Notice how nice and natural this looked. Now, he put in a lot of work and has some large boulders. This area takes the water from the roof. Really good. But even if you just look at the mulch, notice a few things. One of the areas, at least aesthetically, where people go wrong with mulch is they just get all one size of gravel mulch. Oftentimes it's like all 3/4, and you lay it out across the whole landscape and it doesn't look natural at all. It just looks odd. And so he did a really good job of getting pea gravel and a little bit larger gravel, and then some small stone, which you can buy all of it, but by buying different amounts of all of this stuff and mixing it together to get a natural look. And then over here, he has what's called decomposed granite, which is more, sometimes you see it as like a pathway surface and more natural parks, but it's still a mulch, and mixing that with some rock over there, that's really going to get you the look that you want instead of just all one size of stone. It's definitely doable. You just have to have the stone yard, if you're getting it delivered, bring a few more different sizes. And oftentimes, if you talk to them, they can put multiple sizes on the same truck. You don't necessarily need to pay more for delivery. And especially when they dump it, if you don't mind if it gets mixed in a little bit, you can definitely work with them on that. And it doesn't matter if it mixes a little bit because you're going to be doing that anyways. So that's what it looks like if it's done well. And then wood chips as well can be mixed sizes of all sorts of different things. So if you're getting trees trimmed, or if there's someone trimming not diseased but healthy trees in the neighborhood and you need more, you can sometimes have the tree trimmer just drop it off for you if you're willing to spread it and let them drop a big pile in your front yard. And keep it maintainable. So if you're going to be doing the work yourself and you're not trying to be a hobbyist gardener, again, I emphasize, put in, carefully choose your plants, 5 to 12, maybe 15 different low maintenance plants in the yard, repeated or in groups. Keep it simple. Keeping a relatively limited number of different plants repeated is also an easier way to have a professional looking design. And so we're getting towards the end. Just wanted to give you a few other resources. If you want to learn more about specific plants or design, on YouTube, recent classes that we've already taught are California Native Garden Design Workshop and a Do-It-Yourself Landscape Design Workshop. In addition, you also downloadable where you can get the slides of this presentation at cvwcd.org/presentations. There is a PDF file that we've created called the Inland Valley Native Landscape Design Guide. Even if you're not going with California natives, there's some useful information there. We have a little box about how to do the infiltration test with some good drawings. We have a useful box about how to understand the different ways your landscape beds might face, whether they face north or south or east or west, and what that might mean. And then another thing that I want to mention is if you want more information about individual plants, I didn't go into this is a cool plant, that's a cool plant, because you can use the Inland Valley Garden Planner and read up about all of that. But we also did on that same YouTube site a favorite plants for Inland Valley landscapes 3-hour workshop that was really mostly focused on just going through plant by plant by plant. So if you want that content, you can get that there, where it has a lot of those favorite plants, tried and true, work in most landscapes in the Inland Valley. And we separated into trees, shrubs, small plants for long pathways, plants that really are great with that really high reflective heat. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I just wanted to have this here in case you want to pause it on the YouTube replay, or if you want to download the PDF from the website. Here is a list of right around here, and then also a little bit farther out into the San Gabriel Valley and into Orange County, the top sources for getting these kinds of plants. And a few notes. You can absolutely put in the low water plants and still have a high water landscape. We see this all the time with our irrigation consultation program I told you about earlier. You need to make sure also that you're watering your plants appropriately, especially after that first year. So that deep water about once a week the first year, and then less after that. So we will often see a landscape where people took out the turf, they put in the Waterwise plants, but they never changed the timer in the garage because they don't know how to use it. So it's still watering the same schedule as the lawn. That's not going to save you any water. And in fact, it's not going to be good for the health of your Waterwise plants. And so we have all sorts of workshops coming up that you can join or watch afterwards that go into all of the different aspects of how to water your garden correctly, or also just understanding the basic irrigation components. It's not really optional for success. You need to understand a little bit. You don't need to come to all these workshops, but you're going to need to do some minimal either research or understand a bit. And so what's next? We talked about this a little bit, but just to repeat, kind of getting to the conclusion. Plan to plant at the best time of the year, so mid-November, a bit later. Plan to spend the summer planning, learning, designing, killing your turf, and early fall doing other site work and irrigation. Also remember though, if you're applying for your turf removal rebate, you can't start killing your turf yet. You need to do your application, go through that process, and then as soon as you get approved, then you can start killing your turf. Don't get excited and start killing your turf this weekend if you're looking for that rebate. And so you can check out all of our upcoming workshops at cvwcd.org/workshopreg. That will bring you directly to our Eventbrite page, where we have all of this information available and full workshop descriptions. So we don't have time to fully get into it. We're at the very end of the workshop, and we'll do any open questions in just a moment. Also going to have our exit poll, so please stick around. But for those of you who want to download the individual slides of this presentation, I have a whole list of like my very top favorite local plants that you can just look through kind of plant by plant and use that in combination with the Inland Valley Garden Planner. Or again, if you have the time, I'd highly recommend you stream when you have time the favorite plants for Inland Valley Landscapes workshop. So we are going to launch our closing poll. And then as well, this is the cover of that awesome book that Joanna is willing to mail all of you if you put in your address and you are interested. So if you are interested, as you're doing the poll or right after you're done, please put in your address and she will send that really cool resource in the mail to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch the last poll. Thank you so much for joining us. And there are no open questions. If people do have any more questions, feel free to type them in now, and we have plenty of time to answer them. And this information that you give us is really, really useful to us. In addition to this, if you have any other comments, we always love hearing specific comments, either things that were particularly useful to you, or if there was something that you were hoping that we would cover that we didn't, or if there was something that wasn't clear to you, let us know in the poll. This online Zoom workshop is new to a lot of us in the conservation world. And it seems like a really great way to conveniently reach out to people, get information across, but we really want to make sure that it's working for you. So definitely, if you have comments, we would love to read them and we will really take them all into account. And it is 8:01. So for those of you who have other things to get onto in your evening, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and you being interested in moving towards Waterwise landscapes. We have lots of resources. We hope you participate in our other programs and hope to talk to you next time or maybe see you in person eventually.
Thank you so much, Scott, for everything you did for us tonight. We really hope you enjoyed the workshop and feel more rebate ready than when you first started 2 hours ago. So thank you so much for sticking around. Please type in your address in order to receive the free book into the chat feature. Your name will come up automatically, but we just need your address so you can receive the book that we will be mailing out to you. You will be receiving that in the next few days. Thank you so much again. Scott will be putting a link to the presentation on the website as well as our Cucamonga Valley Water District website. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to shoot us a Q&A, or you can email us or feel free to call us as well. We are more than happy to answer any questions you have. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Please type in your address in the chat feature and we will mail out the booklet.
Yeah, so I did notice a couple of the first people to put their names in only put their name. Oh, okay, and I see addresses are coming in afterwards. Okay, never mind. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Scott, and thank you all for joining us. We look forward to having more landscape workshops like this in the future. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed the evening.